Welcome to Everything Mental Health with your hosts, Chris Weeks and Maureen Edwards.
Hey Chris, how's it going?
Hey Maureen, it's going well. How about you?
I'm well, thank you. And what we were talking about just 2 minutes ago was maybe we should explore grief and loss, and as it pertains to substance use addiction.
Sure. It's very interesting when we look at grief and loss, for example. With the clients I work with, they look at the grief in terms of having lost a friend to addiction, or a loved one, a family member, these sorts of things, and what we started to flesh out in workshops is actually so many other losses, so many other griefs that occur as a result of the use of a substance. For example, the loss of dignity, the loss of self-respect, the loss of connection, the loss of a job, the occupation, the loss of a driver's license. It goes on in terms of when we start to expand upon we look at the losses and the underlying grief that occurs as a result of this. So it's eye-opening for some of these guys when they realize the list of losses that can occur, and the subsequent grief that is experienced, which also compounds that sense of the lack of self-worth, the lack of value, and almost kind of this it's a vicious circle of I'm not worth it, I'm a loser, and that almost kind of has a way of fulfilling itself in the continuing use of the substance.
Wow, what you just said was so jam-packed with stuff. What comes up for me when you say all that is that, maybe people aren't even thinking that they have experienced grief and loss unless it's a death. It's a death of a loved one or death of a friend, and it's so much more. And what you said about that loss of dignity and self-worth, I think that is profound with addictions and substance use. And it's one of those things that when you work with people, you can observe that it's been seemingly chipped away at, like, over time, into something that literally, what you said, perpetuates the cycle of use.
Exactly. I have seen, I've read letters from mothers, for example, who have lost a child to addiction, and the grief that she experiences as a result of this, the way in which through for example the mother's eyes, she sees her son alive and full of energy and vital, and sort of doing the things that he he or she used to do, whether it's sports or good at on the debate team, or any number of ways in which there is this this image of the individual healthy and thriving, but yet also there's this the individual who has been suffering through a process of the process of addiction. And so what we see is that individual losing all of that in terms of the image that was held possibly high in other people's eyes, and then the ongoing suffering when we kind of lift it up and look under it a little bit, as far as the trauma that might have occurred and whatnot. So that it's so interesting, because from the perspective of the parent, it's okay. Well, what could I have done? What did I do wrong? Where did I mess up, or any number of ways in which the parent might be kind of also wondering, well, how did this thing take hold? And not that the parent or the caregiver it might not want to take a look at their role in the circumstance, but the whole notion of trauma that leads to this can lead to this kind of substance use is so interesting, complex, and subtle. So when sometimes the parent isn't even, or the caregiver isn't even aware of what this individual may have been going through as a child, and how that child has been processing the information, and what losses that child may have been feeling as they were as he or she was growing up. I mean, that's interestingly enough, that can start to spill over into the whole notion of attachment and whatnot as well, because if we look at what the child may need or want in a relationship with the parent or caregiver, if that need, and it could simply be see that I'm sad, see that I'm hurting, see that there's something going on with me that I can't exactly express. So are you paying attention? And maybe the parent, is to some degree involved with the child, but maybe there's that aspect there that the parent might be missing, as far as I feel sad, I feel alone at school, or something of that sort. And here comes and here these little losses start to build up, until let's say the individual moves into this place of substance use for comfort and coping, and then the other losses start to compound. The grief, once again, of the loss of even personality. The sort of, this person used to be so whatever, and now look at them, they're not themselves, and struggling with this as well,
Yeah. Again, what you said was so jam-packed. It's, when I'm listening, it's almost like this grief and this loss that people can go through, especially when they're little children, and maybe their primary caregiver notices. But it's almost like it's not even just that there's something that has been sort of misplaced or it's not seen. It's almost like there's this, I'm sad because what I want to see or what I want this person to be like isn't there.
Yes.
There's this sort of dream, like I want to see something in the other person, and the other person might want to see something in themselves. I don't know, or maybe not. But there's this sort of illusionary kind of a spin on it,
Mm-hmm.
where um, we're grieving because what we want to see or what we want to experience isn't there.
Exactly. Um, Perfect example is a client with whom I'm working. Um, his father was a well-known figure in the community, so high esteem, you sort of, and was also dealing with a diagnosis of bipolarity.
Mm.
So in the public, this father was held high, wonderful reputation. Um, at home, he tended to be somewhat abusive towards his spouse. This client is witnessing the abuse towards his mom. He's also experiencing some abuse as well, physical as well as emotional, and is growing up wanting his father to be a certain way. Now, what complicated the situation also was that his father was a highly sensitive man who was very defensive about his expressions of abuse. So he felt almost like a scapegoat to some degree when these issues started to come up. So he would shut them down really quickly. And so the boy was growing up expecting or wanting a certain kind of father and or dad, even, and for all intents and purposes, received all of the outward sort of images. Dad would take the family on trips and whatnot, and wonderful toys and these types of things, but inside he wasn't getting the parent that he wanted. Subsequently started to develop independence very early as a coping mechanism. And so here's the grief or the loss of an expectation, and he became very independent. Now the parents saw this as a positive thing. Meanwhile, he was seeing this as my goodness, people aren't getting me, people aren't hearing me.
Yeah.
And most of his life then was spent at school, very, very withdrawn, very quiet, very smart, so once again, performing fairly well in the subjects, but in terms of his even relationships, very, very kind of stunted, and also containing, suppressing a lot of anger, feeling guilty about sort of this as well. So an example was, people in the community would say, your father is such a wonderful guy, such a wonderful figure, and he felt guilty that he wasn't seeing this. And so here again is another a grief that he's kind of experiencing, because he wants to express, well, you don't know what goes on at home, but how can he when his father holds such a high position in the community? So many losses that kind of came out of that, and so now having to accept the fact that, okay, well, I wanted certain things a certain way as far as dad was concerned, but how am I going to maneuver into a healthy relationship with this man when I've been so disappointed? I've experienced so many losses, even loss of respect for him, observing the way in which he would treat his wife. And then, okay, go ahead. I can hear.
Yeah. It's very individually perceived.
Mm-hmm.
So what is a grief or a loss for for one person might not be perceived as that for the people in his life.
Exactly.
And so you can have these losses or these griefs, and nobody else can really see it
Yeah.
or understand it. So it can be a very private experience.
Yes.
That's what I'm sort of getting out of this story that you're sharing.
And then moving into the use of substances to try to cope with this type of confusion or disorganization that's going on within him. And I was going to say also, developing this role of protector for the family and for mom, for example, and also feeling a certain amount of resentment that towards mom as a result of the continued relationship. So sort of this grieving of family even.
Yes.
And so using a substance to try to cope with this, and perpetuating the sort of, interestingly enough, anxiety and depression, and then when translated into relationship, having this just incredible the complexity of getting into relationship, where there's a highlighting of the partner at first, almost like holding the partner on a pedestal, that the partner is the positive element in this situation. Meanwhile, I have this negative image of myself. And unfortunately, if the partner in any way does not live up to the expectations that have now been transferred or onto this person, right? Suddenly that person now becomes a negative figure. So taking a number of the let's say the losses from the expectation in the family, trying to transfer those expectations onto another person, and obviously that person at some point is not going to live up to those expectations, and then suddenly that person isn't it's almost like creating the same situation that
Yes.
the client came from.
Yes.
Right.
And that seems to be what happens. There's this perpetual reenactment.
Yes.
Or reoccurrence of the same pattern with a different person.
Yes.
Or with a different circumstance or experience.
Mm-hmm.
And many times what I've witnessed, I don't have any, research to back me up, but it seems to be all within the original experience of grief and loss that the person sort of experienced when they were a child.
Exactly.
It
So,
reenacts over and over again.
Yes.
And it looks a bit different, but it's all the same thing in a different flavor.
Exactly. And that slides into the way in which the primary caregivers related to the child, and the kinds of attachments, and we can call it, that the child develops as a result of this. And we see when we look into the addiction, so many the grief that kind of that the individual may experience as far as this goes, sort of it's once again interesting and complex, because looking at the losses in the family, looking at the losses of the kind of relationships that the individual wanted in the family, and then the perpetuation of this in relationship, and the continuing losses. So because the if a relationship comes to an end, there's the feeling of grief, the loss of the relationship. There's the perpetuation of this sense of worthlessness. What's wrong with me? And here we go again. So we see the kind of cycle of grief and loss kind of continuing. And what I find interesting is that we may look at, as you mentioned, the grieving process in terms of the loss of a loved one, the loss of a friend, and whatnot. Also, but the process also takes place with these, micro losses, if you want to call it, and every time. So when they come in, it's very interesting when we start to uncover the whole business of the addiction, that the number of losses that have not been grieved, and so not realizing that, well, yeah, sort of I lost a friend and I went through that, but when it's opened up to them that well, yeah, did you grieve the loss of the relationship? Did you grieve the loss of your relationship with your children? Have you grieved the loss of this getting back to this sense of dignity, or the loss of your own of self-respect, the loss of the way in which you used to relate to other people, and it goes on, and it's revelatory at times for these individuals when they realize, my goodness, I've got to work through all of these as well, in terms of this kind of the grieving process, and come out the other end, as allow this to happen and then come out the other end. Or else, I go through a recovery process and I'm not using a substance, but underlying this are these unresolved griefs as well still.
Yeah, and it also speaks to the fact that addiction and substance use is a coping mechanism for, like, it's a secondary phenomena, and there's something that's under that
Yes.
is the root, and the substance use then comes to sort of deal with the underlying issue.
Yes, absolutely.
That seems to be a takeaway here. Thank you, Chris. I'd love to continue.
Yeah, it's a lot. Thank you, Maureen.